I am 67 years old, and I have finally bought my dream home. My name is Agatha Hemmings, and I have worked hard all my life to ensure that I have a good old age. Many people think it's too late to make changes at my age, but I always knew I wanted to spend my last years of life in my own home with a small garden where I could grow roses. Miles City is a small town where everyone knows each other. I moved here 35 years ago with my young son after my divorce. At the time, I thought it was temporary, but fate had it differently. At first, I got a job as a teacher in the kindergarten Solnishko on the outskirts of the city, and in the evenings I worked part-time as a dispatcher in a cab service. The salary was small, but it was enough to rent a modest two-room apartment and eat. I tried to give Oberon everything he needed: clothes, toys, books. I didn't want him to feel inferior to the other children. Every month I saved at least a little. At first it was just small things, but I was persistent. I remember my coworkers laughing when I refused to go out to cafes or buy new clothes. "Agatha, live for today," they said. But I had a dream, and I was determined to pursue it. I had a special piggy bank, a ceramic pig that Oberon had given me for one of my birthdays when I was a kid. Every night I threw in the change I had left over from shopping. It filled up quickly, and once a month I took the money to the bank to replenish my savings account. The sums were small, but they grew year by year, bringing me closer to my goal. When Oberon turned 12, I started working part-time as a weekend cleaner at a local hotel. My hands were chapped from the cleaning products, and my back ached from the hard work, but I didn't complain. This extra money allowed me to save more and still be able to keep up with my son's necessities. At 21, Oberon left to attend college in a neighboring state. I paid his tuition, denying myself everything. My dream of owning my own home had to be temporarily put on hold. My son's education seemed more important to me. I wanted him to have everything I couldn't have. Oberon didn't finish college. In his third year, he dropped out and announced that he was marrying a girl named Trinity Bascom. They met at a party, and 3 months later they decided to get married. I was against it, but who'd listen to me? They had a modest wedding without my involvement. I found out about it after the fact, when Oberon called to tell me they needed money for a down payment on an apartment. Trinity turned out to be a pretty girl with cold eyes. The first time we met, she took an appraising look at my apartment and puckered her lips. "Now I see why Oberon didn't want me to come here," she said then. I remained silent, even though it hurt me to hear it. That day was the first time I noticed my son looking at me through the eyes of a stranger. The next years passed in rare and brief meetings for the holidays. Oberon and Trinity lived in another city, and each visit was a challenge for me. They never stayed at my place, preferring to rent a hotel room. "Your place is too cramped, Mom," Oberon would say. Trinity would agree and add something about her allergy to dust. I continued to save money, but now not just for the house, but for gifts for the grandchildren I never got to see. Trinity declared that children were too much responsibility, and she wanted to live for herself. Oberon supported his wife, even though he used to say he wanted a large family. After 50, I got a small promotion at the kindergarten and became the head teacher. I had to give up my job as a cab driver. My health wasn't what it used to be. But I found a part-time job at the local bakery, where I helped sell fresh baked goods on weekends. The money was not much, but it filled my bank account drop by drop. At 65, I retired. By then, I had enough in my account for a down payment on a small house. I started looking and found the perfect one: a one-story, three-bedroom house with a garden in a quiet neighborhood in Miles City. It was old and needed repairs, but most importantly, it was within my means. I met with a realtor, a young, energetic woman named Cassie Reeves. She showed me several options, but it was this house on Elm Street that immediately won my heart. It was built in the 50s, with high ceilings, wood floors, and large windows overlooking the garden. The backyard was neglected, but I could see its potential. A flower bed and vegetables could be planted there. "The house needs repairs," Cassie warned me, "but the basic systems are fine." The roof was replaced 5 years ago, the electrical wiring updated. The bathroom and kitchen are outdated but functional. I spent almost an hour in the house, going around each room, envisioning how I would live here. The master bedroom was spacious, with 2 windows and a built-in closet. The other 2 bedrooms were smaller, but quite comfortable. A living room with a fireplace that Cassie said was in working order. A kitchen with access to the backyard. Everything exactly as I'd dreamed it would be. I'll take it, I told Cassie, not even trying to haggle. The price was fair and the house was worth every penny. The paperwork took a few weeks to finalize. I signed a 15-year mortgage. With my pension and small savings, I could afford the monthly payments. Cassie helped me with the insurance and other formalities. Then, one day, she handed me the keys to my new home. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hemmings," she said with a smile. "Welcome to your new home." I couldn't believe my happiness. After so many years of saving money, working part-time jobs, giving up small pleasures, I finally had a home of my own. A place where no one could raise my rent or ask me to vacate the premises. A place I could call my own. Moving wasn't easy. I had accumulated quite a few things over the years of living in a rented apartment, but I decided to keep most of them. The new house needed new furniture, new curtains, new dishes. I couldn't afford to buy everything at once, but it wasn't necessary. The main thing was that I had my home. The first night in my new home, I hardly slept at all. I lay on the air mattress in the master bedroom and listened to the sounds of the house, the creaking floorboards, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the rustling of leaves outside the window. Everything was new and a little scary, but at the same time it filled me with joy. I was finally home. I woke up in the morning with the first rays of sunlight peeking through the window. I made myself some coffee on the new stove and walked out into the backyard with a cup. Dew glistened on the grass. Birds sang in the branches of an old apple tree. I took a deep breath and felt happiness overwhelm me. This was my yard, my land, my little piece of paradise. The following weeks passed in the care of setting up the house. I painted the walls light colors, bought used but sturdy furniture from a thrift store, and hung curtains that I sewed myself. Each day brought small victories: a shelf installed, a faucet repaired, a flower bed cleared of weeds. I worked tirelessly, but this work brought me pleasure. I was creating my home, my world in which I wanted to live. The neighbors turned out to be friendly people. On the left lived an elderly couple, Edward and Martha Pruitt, who had lived in their home for almost 40 years. They were the first to come over to get acquainted, brought homemade pie, and offered to help if they needed it. On the right is a young family with 2 children, the Bakers. Mr. Baker helped me fix a leaky faucet in the bathroom, and Mrs. Baker often invited me over for a cup of tea when the kids were at school. When I informed Oberon of my purchase, he showed interest in my life for the first time in a long time. "A house? A whole house? How much did you pay for it?" he asked over the phone. I told him about my savings and the mortgage I planned to pay from my pension. "But Mom, why do you need such a big house? You're alone." He sounded perplexed. I replied that I had always dreamed of having my own house and now I could afford it. Oberon was silent for a moment and then said that he and Trinity would definitely come to see my purchase. They came 2 weeks after I moved in. No advance notice, they just called from the road and said they'd be there in an hour. I got excited, started making treats, cleaning up even though the house was already clean. I wanted to make a good impression. Their Cara brand new silver sedan stopped at the gate exactly 1 hour later. Oberon got out first, looked around the house and whistled. Trinity, in a fancy dress and impeccably styled, leisurely got out of the car, put on her sunglasses and looked around too. "Mom, this is really impressive," Oberon said as he put his arm around me. He smelled like expensive cologne and cigarettes, even though he always claimed he didn't smoke. Trinity coldly touched my cheek with her cheek and held out a bag of fruit. "We bought some on the way in. Organic," she said in a tone like it made a huge difference. I gave them a tour of the house, showing them each room, telling them my plans for the arrangement. Oberon nodded and asked questions, and Trinity followed silently, occasionally touching the walls with her fingertips as if checking for dust. When we reached the garden, Oberon finally asked bluntly, "How much did you pay for all this?" I named the amount, and he whistled. "And where did you get so much money, Mother?" "I've been saving all my life," I replied. "A little bit every month, plus retirement savings." Trinity, who had been silent until then, suddenly perked up. "What about property taxes? And insurance? Have you thought about that, Agatha?" "Of course I've thought about it." I'd calculated everything down to the cent, including utilities and possible repair costs. But instead of saying that, I just nodded and invited them to the table. Over lunch, Oberon asked me about the neighbors, the neighborhood, the accessibility of transportation. Trinity barely ate, just picking at her salad with her fork and occasionally sipping water from a glass. When I suggested they stay the night, since there were 2 spare bedrooms in the house, they looked at each other and declined. "We have a room booked at the inn," Oberon said. "Plus, Trinity has an important video conference tomorrow, and she needs stable internet." I didn't insist. As I walked them to the car, I was suddenly relieved to be alone in my house. A strange feeling for a mother, but I couldn't deny it. Oberon and Trinity left, but their visit left a strange feeling behind. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me. Maybe too many questions about the value of the house, or Trinity's remarks about taxes and insurance, as if I wasn't capable of taking care of my finances, or the way Oberon looked at each room as if assessing its value. Over the next few days, I tried not to think about it, focusing on fixing up the house and garden. I bought rose bushes of various varieties and planted them along the south side of the house, where there was the most sun. I planted a small vegetable garden for herbs and vegetables. I hung a bird feeder on an old apple tree. Oberon called once a week, wondering how things were going with the house. There was a new note in his voice, respect, and maybe even envy. He talked about his work at the advertising agency, about Trinity's projects, which involved interior design for wealthy clients. Not once did he ask if I needed help or if I was having a hard time alone in the big house. "You know, Mom," he said in one of those calls, "Trinity and I are thinking about buying a house. The apartment is getting cramped and the rent keeps going up." "That's a good idea," I replied. "Having your own place is stability." "Yes, but prices are so high now," he sighed. "We wish we had your practicality and ability to save money." I could have told him about the years of deprivation, about how I had denied myself the bare necessities to pay for his education and whims, about working 3 jobs so he could have everything he wanted. But instead I just said, "It starts small. Set aside a little each month." He laughed. "Mom, that's no way to live now. You have to take everything from life while you're young. Besides, we have our own way of life, you know that." Yes, I knew. Their lifestyle included expensive restaurants, brand-name clothes, vacations twice a year in exotic resorts. They never denied themselves any pleasures, believing they were living in the moment. At the same time, Oberon regularly asked me for money, which he never repaid. Our relationship with my son was always complicated. I loved him unconditionally, as only a mother can. But over the years, I saw his faults more and more clearly. His selfishness, his habit of living beyond his means, his inability to appreciate what he had. Maybe it was my own fault. Maybe I spoiled him too much as a child, trying to compensate for his father's absence. Or maybe I worked too hard and didn't spend enough time raising him. Trinity only reinforced these traits in Oberon's character. She was ambitious and materialistic. For her, only the external trappings of success mattered. Expensive things, prestigious vacation spots, the right acquaintances. She looked down on me, barely concealing her contempt for my modest lifestyle. To her, I was just an old woman who was somehow important to her husband, but with whom there was nothing to talk about. I tried to ignore her coldness, for Oberon's sake. But with each of their visits, it became more and more difficult, especially after Trinity said they didn't want to have children. That was a hard blow to me. I'd always dreamed of grandchildren, of a big family gathered around a holiday table. But Oberon and Trinity had other plans. "Children are too much responsibility," Trinity said. "We're still young. We want to live for ourselves." And now, in my new home, I thought about the fact that maybe it was for the best. I had my own world, my own piece of happiness that I had created with my own hands. Maybe I shouldn't try to squeeze people into that world who don't belong here. Even if those people are my own son and his wife. It's been 3 months since I moved in. The house was slowly transforming, becoming cozy and settled. I learned to navigate in it with my eyes closed, knew every creak of floorboards, every crack on the walls. It was my home, my refuge, my fortress. The morning usually started the same way. I woke up with the first rays of sunlight peeking through the bedroom window. I would leisurely prepare breakfast, make tea, and walk out onto the back porch with a cup. Sitting in a wicker chair, I watched the garden wake up, the flowers blooming, the birds coming to the feeder, the dewdrops glistening on the leaves of the rose bushes. After breakfast, I usually worked in the garden, weeding, watering, pruning. My roses had already begun to bloom, filling the air with a subtle fragrance. I planted different varieties, tea roses, variegated floribunda, to bloom all summer long. Next to the roses is a small vegetable garden, tomatoes, cucumbers, herbs, nothing special but enough to provide myself with fresh vegetables. On particularly hot days, I moved gardening to the morning or evening, and during the day I did housework or read books I'd long wanted to read but hadn't found the time. Sometimes I went to the town library, where I made friends with Mr. Perkins, the elderly librarian. He recommended books to me, and his taste almost always coincided with mine. In the evenings, I often sat on the porch watching the life of the street. Children on bicycles, neighbors returning from work, elderly couples taking an evening mooch. My street was quiet and peaceful. Everyone here knew each other and said hello when they met. Sometimes my neighbor, Mrs. Pruitt, would drop by, and the two of us would sit together, discussing the latest town news and swapping recipes. In those days, I was truly happy. For the first time in years, I was living the life I wanted without having to adjust to someone else's wants and needs. My home, my garden, my books, my neighbors, all of these things created a sense of fullness of life that I had missed so much before. Of course, sometimes I missed Oberon, remembered his childhood, the times when we had been truly close. But our current relationship left a lot to be desired. He called rarely, mostly when he needed something. Our conversations became shorter and more formal. I felt like we were drifting apart, but I didn't know how to fix it. The day everything changed, I was working in the garden. It was the middle of summer and the heat was unbearable even in the shade. I had finished watering the roses and was about to go inside when the phone rang. It was Oberon, and I recognized his number on the screen. Strange, he usually called on the weekends and today was Wednesday. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained. "Can you talk?" "Of course," I replied, entering the chilly house and closing the door behind me. "What's wrong?" "We're in trouble," he said after a short pause. "We're being evicted from our apartment." I sank into a chair by the phone table. "Evicted? Why?" "Debts." His voice trembled. "We owe 3 months' rent. The landlord gave us a week to vacate the premises." I was silent, trying to comprehend what I'd heard. Oberon and Trinity had always lived large, but I thought they were doing okay financially. Oberon worked at an advertising agency, and Trinity worked as an interior designer. Their combined income should have allowed them to live comfortably and pay their bills on time. "What happened to your money?" I asked finally. Oberon sighed. "It's complicated, Mother. I've had some financial difficulties, investments that haven't paid off, and Trinity doesn't have many customers right now because of the economic downturn." I suspected he wasn't telling me the whole truth, but I didn't press. "So what are you going to do?" "That's what I wanted to talk about." A pleading tone came into his voice. "Mom, we need a place to stay until we solve our financial problems. We were wondering, maybe you'd let us stay at your place? Just for a little while, just a few weeks until we find a new apartment." I felt the anxiety building up inside. My home, my sanctuary, my little paradise. And suddenly there would be Oberon and Trinity, with their complicated relationships and consumerism toward me. But on the other hand, how could I refuse my own son when he's in trouble? "Oberon, I only have 3 bedrooms, and one of them is quite small," I said, trying to buy time. "Besides, I live on my own schedule, and I'm not sure you'd be comfortable." "Mom, please." There was a note of desperation in his voice. "We don't have anywhere else to go. All our friends live in small apartments. They don't have room for us, and hotels are too expensive. We can't afford that kind of expense right now." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My inner voice was screaming, "Don't agree. They will turn your life upside down." But how could I say no? This is my son, my blood, and he's in trouble. "All right," I said at last. "You can stay at my place, but we'll need to discuss the rules of the stay and the terms." "Thank you, Mother," Oberon exclaimed with such relief that I felt embarrassed for my doubts. You have no idea how much this means to us. We'll be very careful and try not to disturb you. When do you plan to arrive? I asked, already mentally rearranging my plans. Can we come this Saturday? We need to pack our things and settle some things here. Okay, Saturday, I agreed. Call me when you check out so I know when to expect you. After talking to Oberon, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, looking out the window at my garden and contemplating the changes ahead. My measured, quiet way of life would soon be disrupted. There would be new people with their own habits, their own routines, their own problems. Will I be able to cope? Would I regret my decision? But I had no choice. I couldn't leave my son homeless, no matter how difficult our relationship was. After all, it's temporary, just for a few weeks. We'll get through it. The next few days were spent preparing for Oberon and Trinity's arrival. I cleared out the large guest bedroom for them, bought new bedding, made room in the closet for their belongings. I bought groceries, remembering what Oberon liked and trying to accommodate Trinity's preferences, though it was difficult. She had some special diets that kept changing. I also made a list of rules for living in my house. I'd never had to do this before, but my intuition told me that it was better to set things straight with Oberon and Trinity. On the list were items like respect each other's privacy, give notice when guests arrive, and keep the common areas clean. Nothing fancy, just basic rules for living together. The neighbors noticed my activity and asked what was going on. I told Mrs. Pruitt about the impending arrival of my son and daughter-in-law. Will they be staying with you long? She asked, helping me hang freshly laundered curtains in the guest bedroom. No, just for a few weeks, I replied. Just until they find a new apartment. Mrs. Pruitt looked at me doubtfully but said nothing. She was older than I was, and she had a lot of life experience under her belt. Perhaps she had seen situations like this before and knew how they usually ended. Friday night, the night before Oberon and Trinity arrived, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset and saying goodbye to the peace and quiet that had prevailed in my house for the past few months. I knew things would change soon, and I tried to savor the last few hours of solitude. Saturday came all too quickly. I woke up early, as usual, and the first thing I did was go to the garden. My roses were blooming, filling the air with a subtle fragrance. I ran my hand over the delicate petals, feeling their silky texture. It's going to be okay, I told myself. It's only for a few weeks. Oberon called at 11 in the morning, saying they were on their way and would be in about 3 hours. I made lunch, set the table on the veranda, and waited. The time dragged slowly, and every now and then I looked at my watch and went outside to see if their car had shown up. Finally, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw a familiar silver sedan pull up in front of my house. Oberon was the first to get out of the car, followed by Trinity. Both of them looked tired and tense. I walked out onto the porch to greet them. Oberon hugged me tighter than usual, and I could feel him shaking. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "You're really helping us out a lot." Trinity hugged me too, which was uncharacteristic of her. She usually limited herself to a formal cheek-to-cheek touch. "Agatha, we're so grateful to you," she said. "I swear we won't bother you." I helped them move their belongings into the house. For people who had been evicted from their apartment, they had a surprising amount of luggage, suitcases of clothes, boxes of books, and personal belongings, even some furniture they had decided not to leave in their old apartment. "We couldn't take everything," Oberon explained, pulling another suitcase into the house. Some things had to be sold or left behind. I showed them to their room, helping them place their things. Trinity looked around the bedroom with a critical expression on her face, but didn't say anything. I noticed her run her finger over the dresser, as if checking for dust, and she wrinkled her nose a little. But then she caught my gaze and gave me a quick smile. "It's fine, Agatha," she said. "Very cozy." After all the things were brought into the house, I invited them to dinner. We sat on the veranda and I served roast vegetables, a simple but hearty meal. Trinity barely touched her food, as usual, but Oberon ate with gusto, even asking for more. "I'd forgotten how good you cook, Mother," he said with his mouth full. "Lately, we've mostly been ordering takeout or eating convenience foods." After lunch, When Trinity went to take a shower, I decided to talk to Oberon alone. We sat down in the living room and I pulled out my list of rules. Oberon, I want you to understand that I'm happy to help you in a difficult situation, but I have my own way of life, my own habits. To make our living together comfortable for everyone, I've made some simple rules. He nodded, but I noticed a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Of course, Mom, we'll respect your rules. I began to read the list. Respect personal space, warn of guests, keep the common areas clean. Oberon nodded after each point, but I sensed he wasn't taking it seriously. And one more important point, I added when the list was read. How long do you plan to live here? Oberon shrugged. It's hard to say exactly. We need to find a new apartment, and that's not easy. Rental prices have gone up, and with our credit history, all in all, it could take a while. I understand, but I need at least an approximate time frame. A month? 2? Let's say 2 months, he suggested. We should definitely find something in that time. I nodded, though an inner voice told me that was too optimistic a prediction. Okay, 2 months. And one more question. Will you contribute to the expenses of the house? Utility bills, groceries? Oberon grumbled. Mom, we don't have any money at all right now. We spent the last of our savings to pay off some of our apartment debt. But as soon as we get a job, we'll be sure to help out. A job? I was surprised. What happened to your previous jobs? He averted his eyes. Yeah, I was downsized 2 months ago, and Trinity hasn't had many clients at all lately. That was it. Now I see where the rent arrears came from. But why didn't Oberon tell me about it before? I could have helped, given them some money so they wouldn't be in this situation. Why didn't you tell me you lost your job? I asked. He shrugged. Didn't want to bother you. Thought I'd find something new quickly. There are always openings in advertising. I sensed he wasn't telling me the truth, but I decided not to push. Let them settle in, get used to the new situation, and then we'd talk more frankly. Trinity returned from her shower, and the conversation naturally broke down. She looked refreshed, but still tense. I suggested that they rest after their journey, and I went into the garden. I needed to be alone and reflect on what I'd learned. As I worked in the garden, I thought about the situation. Oberon and Trinity were out of work, out of a place to live, out of money. They were counting on me, on my help. But what could I give them but a roof over their heads? My pension was modest, barely enough to cover my own needs and mortgage payments. I didn't have enough money to support 2 more adults. On the other hand, how could I say no to them? This is my son, my blood. I've always tried to give him the best, even when it meant giving up my own wants and needs. Maybe now I should put his interests above my own. But deep inside, I felt uneasy. Something told me that this situation could drag on for a long time, much longer than the promised 2 months. That Oberon and Trinity would take their time finding new apartments and jobs, having grown accustomed to the comfort of my home and my care. In the evening, we had dinner together, and I showed them how to use the washing machine, where the spare towels were, how to adjust the air conditioner. They listened attentively and asked questions, but I could see that they were anxious to be alone. Perhaps they had something important to discuss, or just needed to rest after a busy day. I said goodnight to them and retired to my bedroom, leaving them in the living room. As I lay in bed, I could hear their muffled voices, but I couldn't make out their words. They talked for a long time, sometimes raising their voices, but not enough for me to understand what they were saying. I fell asleep late, with a heavy heart and a vague premonition that my life would never be the same again. That this day was the beginning of a new chapter, one that might be much more difficult and painful than I had imagined. I woke up later than usual in the morning, knocked out of my usual rhythm. The house was quiet. Oberon and Trinity were still asleep. I quietly made my breakfast, drank tea on the veranda, and went to work in the garden, trying not to make any noise so as not to wake the guests. They showed up around noon, sleepy and a little confused. Oberon was the first to ask where the coffee was, and Trinity asked if I had skim milk and whole wheat bread. I shook my head. I didn't have those products. I preferred simple, traditional food. That's okay, Trinity said with a strained smile. I'll make a trip to the store and buy what I need. With what money? I wanted to ask, but I kept silent. I didn't want to start the day with an unpleasant conversation. After breakfast, Oberon said that he and Trinity wanted to go into town to look at apartment listings and stop by a few employment agencies. I was glad to hear that they were wasting no time and were actively looking for solutions to their problems. Take my car, I offered. I'm not going anywhere today. They left in the afternoon and returned late in the evening. I was starting to worry, but I didn't call. They were adults, and I didn't want to seem intrusive. When they finally showed up, they both looked tired and disappointed. How was your day? I asked, heating up dinner for them. Oberon sighed heavily. Not great. The apartments are either too expensive or in terrible condition, and the agency said it's not a good time to look for work. Summer, everyone's on vacation, new projects aren't starting. But you're not going to give up, are you? I asked, trying to encourage them. Of course not, Trinity replied. It just takes time. Things will get better, you'll see. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me from the inside. Something in their demeanor, in their words, made me think they weren't looking hard enough for a job and a place to live. Maybe they had already accepted the idea that they would be living with me for an indefinite period of time. And so began our days under the same roof. Oberon and Trinity usually got up late, ate breakfast, then went out to look for something and came back in the evening with the same news. They hadn't found anything suitable. They needed more time. I tried to believe them, to support them, but every day my anxiety grew. A week after their arrival, I noticed that money started disappearing from my wallet. Not large amounts, but noticeable enough for me. $50 here, $100 there. I didn't want to think that Oberon or Trinity might have taken it without asking, but I couldn't find any other explanation. One evening as we sat at dinner, I decided to bring it up. Oberon, you didn't take money from my purse? I asked bluntly. He choked on his water and coughed. Trinity threw him a quick glance, then turned to me. Agatha, what are you talking about? How can you suspect us of stealing? I'm not talking about stealing, I replied calmly. I'm just asking if Oberon took money. Maybe he needed cash right away and forgot to tell me. Oberon finally stopped coughing and looked at me guiltily. Mom, I'm sorry. Yes, I took some money. We needed to pay for gas and buy some groceries. I was going to tell you, but I forgot. I'll pay it back as soon as I get a job. I nodded, accepting his explanation, though an inner voice told me it wasn't the whole truth. I didn't want to spoil the already tense atmosphere at the table. After that incident, I began to hide my money and valuables. It wasn't that I didn't trust Oberon, but caution never hurt, especially as their financial situation became more and more desperate, and their hopes for quick employment were melting away by the day. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival. My house had changed beyond recognition. Oberon and Trinity's things were strewn everywhere. Clothes, shoes, books, cosmetics. They occupied the bathroom for hours in the mornings, leaving me barely 10 minutes to tidy up. The kitchen was always a mess. They cooked late dinners and didn't clean up after themselves. My refrigerator was full of their groceries, leaving little room for my usual purchases. But worst of all, I lost my peace and privacy. I could no longer sit quietly on the veranda watching the sunset. Oberon and Trinity were often there, talking loudly or listening to music. I couldn't work quietly in the garden. Trinity was always complaining about mosquitoes and asking me not to water the plants when she was sunbathing on the lawn. My home, my sanctuary, my fortress, it was all gradually slipping away from me. I felt like a guest in my own home, alien and unwanted. Oberon and Trinity didn't even seem to notice my discomfort. They were completely absorbed in their own problems and needs, leaving no room for mine. And yet, I endured. They were in trouble. They had nowhere to go. I couldn't kick them out into the street despite all the inconvenience they caused. I hoped that soon they would find a job and a place to live and everything would go back to normal. But that hope was growing weaker by the day. It had been a week since Oberon and Trinity had moved into my house. For the first few days, they had been relatively quiet, trying to follow my rules and even thanking me for every little thing. But gradually, their behavior began to change. Politeness was replaced by carelessness, and then outright disregard. I noticed it one morning when I went into the kitchen and found a mountain of unwashed dishes in the sink. Oberon and Trinity had cooked dinner the night before, something elaborate with a lot of ingredients and seasonings. I went to bed before they finished, but I was sure they would clean up after themselves. One of my rules was to keep the common areas clean. Oberon, did you remember to wash the dishes after dinner last night? I asked when he finally showed up in the kitchen around noon. He rubbed his eyes sleepily and shrugged. Mom, we were too tired. I'll wash up later. One of our rules is to clean up after ourselves right away, I reminded him. I hate waking up and seeing such a mess in the kitchen. Oberon sighed with obvious irritation. You're too hung up on your rules. It's not like we're living in a barracks. Relax a little. I was surprised at his tone and reaction. This wasn't the same Oberon who a week ago had sworn to respect my rules and be a model guest. Something had changed, and not for the better. Trinity joined us a few minutes later, looking flawless even just after waking up. What are we arguing about? She asked, pouring herself some coffee. Mom's not happy we didn't do the dishes last night, Oberon replied with a touch of sarcasm. Trinity glanced at the sink and wrinkled her nose. Yeah, it looks messy. Agatha, do you have a dishwasher? No, I replied. I've always washed dishes by hand. Trinity looked over to Oberon. Maybe we should install one? It would save time and effort, especially at your age. My age? I was only 67 and I was perfectly capable of doing household chores without any machines. But I remained silent, not wanting to start the day with conflict. I'll think about it, I said neutrally. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd follow the rules and wash the dishes immediately after use. Of course, Agatha, Trinity smiled, but there was no warmth in her smile. I felt like I wasn't being taken seriously, and it hurt. After breakfast, I went to work in the garden as usual. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with myself and my thoughts. But even there, change caught up with me. Mom, we've been thinking, Oberon said, coming out into the yard with a cup of coffee. Maybe we should redo the garden. Those rose bushes are taking up too much space. You could make a barbecue area or even a small pool. I froze with the pruning shears in my hand. Oberon, this is my garden. I've been dreaming of roses for years, and I finally got around to planting them. I'm not going to remove them for a barbecue. Well, technically it's our garden now too, he remarked. We live here, and it would be nice to make it more modern. You're living here temporarily, I reminded him. Once you find a job and an apartment, you'll go back to your life. Oberon didn't answer, but I noticed his face change. He seemed to want to say something else, but changed his mind and just went back inside. In the evening of the same day, another unpleasant incident occurred. I came back from the store and found that my favorite vase, which stood on the dresser in the living room, was gone. In its place was a strange metal sculpture I'd never seen before. Oberon, I called out, have you seen my vase? The one on the dresser. He came out of his room with a guilty look on his face. Oh yeah, Trinity moved it, said it didn't fit in. Doesn't fit? I couldn't believe my ears. This is my house, and I decide what fits in and what doesn't. Where is the vase now? In the pantry, I think, but Mom, Trinity is a professional interior designer. She knows how to make a space more harmonious. Maybe we should take her advice. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Oberon, I appreciate Trinity's professionalism, but this is my home. I didn't ask for the interior to be redecorated. Please put the vase back where it belongs, and from now on, ask permission before changing anything. He shrugged with obvious displeasure but went to find the vase. A few minutes later, it was back in its place and the metal sculpture was gone. These were only the first warning bells that foreshadowed more serious conflicts. Each day, Oberon and Trinity pushed my boundaries more and more, invading my personal space and breaking my rules. They started inviting guests over unannounced. One day, I returned from the library and found 4 strangers in my living room, laughing loudly and drinking wine from my glasses. Oberon introduced them as his friends who just stopped by to say hello. These short visits often dragged on well into the night, disrupting my sleep and routine. They rearranged the furniture to their liking. My favorite armchair, which stood by the window overlooking the garden, was suddenly in the corner because that's the best way to distribute the space. Paintings on the walls changed places, books on the shelves moved, even flower pots on the windowsills did not escape their improvements. They began to control what I cooked and ate. Trinity was constantly talking about healthy eating, organic foods, and a gluten-free diet. She would throw out foods from my refrigerator, deeming them unhealthy, and replace them with her own obscure and expensive foods. When I protested, she would reply with a disarming smile. Agatha, we're just concerned about your health. At your age, you need to be more careful about your diet. There was that phrase again, at your age. They said it more and more often, as if I were a feeble old woman unable to make decisions about my own life. Agatha, at your age, you shouldn't be gardening on your own. We can hire a gardener. Mom, it's dangerous to drive a car at your age. Maybe we should sell it. At your age, such a big house is more of a burden than a pleasure. Have you thought of something more compact? This last phrase was spoken at dinner 3 weeks after their arrival. Trinity said it casually, as she was putting on her salad, but I sensed there was something more behind it. What do you mean? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Trinity glanced over to Oberon as if they had discussed this conversation beforehand. Well, a house this big requires constant upkeep. 3 bedrooms for one person is too much. Plus, there are a lot of stairs, high thresholds, all of which can be dangerous if you have balance or vision problems. I don't have balance or vision problems, I replied firmly. And I like my house just the way it is. Of course it's fine now, Oberon interjected. But we're thinking about the future. You know, there are excellent nursing homes with 24-hour care, medical attention, and a community of peers. You might want to think about that. I set my fork aside, my appetite gone completely. I'm 67, not 97. I'm not going into a nursing home. No one's talking about moving immediately. Trinity tried to soften the situation. It's just worth considering options for the future. And the house? Well, Oberon and I could buy it. At a fair price, of course. That was it. Everything fell into place now. They weren't just trying to control my life, they wanted my house. The house I'd paid for with years of labor and hardship. The house that was the realization of my dreams. My house is not for sale, I said, getting up from the table. And this conversation is over. I left for my room, feeling my hands shaking with anger and resentment. How could they? How could my own son suggest that I move into a nursing home to take possession of my home? I couldn't believe this was really happening. The next morning, I got up early and went to the garden, needing the solace that working with plants gave me. But even there, I was met with some unpleasant surprises. My favorite rose bushes had been pruned, and not just pruned, but savagely cut down, stripped of most of their flowering branches. Trinity's pruning shears and gardening gloves were lying nearby. I couldn't hold back the tears. I'd grown these roses with such love, each bush so special to me. And now they had been mutilated by the ruthless hand of a man who understood nothing about gardening. Oberon found me there, sitting on a bench, crying. Mom? What's wrong? He asked with feigned concern. Who let Trinity touch my roses? I asked, not hiding my anger. He looked around and shrugged. She just wanted to help, said the bushes were getting too big and needed pruning. That's not pruning, that's destruction, I exclaimed. She killed half the bush. Now they won't bloom until next year. Don't be dramatic, Mom. They're just flowers. They'll grow back. Just flowers? I couldn't believe my ears. They're my roses, in my garden, in my house, and I never allowed anyone to touch them. Oberon sighed with the look of a man talking to a cranky child. Mother, we live here. This house is ours to share now. And so is the garden. We have the right to make changes. No, you don't, I objected. You're here temporarily. Guests, not hosts, and I expect you to respect my rules and my property. He looked at me with some strange expression, a mixture of pity and annoyance. Maybe we should have a serious talk about the future, Mom. About your future and the future of this house. We have nothing to talk about, I retorted. My future is tied to this house, period. I walked away, not wanting to continue this conversation, but I felt that this was only the beginning, that Oberon and Trinity wouldn't back down so easily, especially now that I realized their true intentions. The following days passed in a tense atmosphere. Oberon and Trinity no longer pretended to be polite guests. They openly ignored my rules, invited friends over unannounced, occupied the bathroom for hours on end, and cooked noisy dinners until late at night. My home became a place where I felt unwelcome. They kept hinting that I should consider moving to a more suitable place. Trinity brought nursing home brochures, leaving them in prominent places. Oberon told stories of people he knew whose elderly parents had found a new life in institutions. Can you imagine, Mom? There's a swimming pool, a gym, a library, constant entertainment, new friends your age. You'd love it. I ignored these conversations, but I could feel my anxiety growing. What if they didn't stop at hints? What if they tried to force me to leave against my will? The climax came on Friday night, a month after their arrival. I returned from the store and found a small group gathered in the living room. Oberon, Trinity, and 3 other strangers were sitting with glasses of wine and chatting animatedly. "Ah, Mother," Oberon said, spotting me. "Meet Mr. Benson, the realtor. And this is Mr. and Mrs. Coleman. They're interested in buying property in our neighborhood." I froze in place, not believing my ears. "Buying real estate? My house?" Trinity walked over to me with a fake smile. "Agatha, we're just showing the house to potential buyers. Don't worry, we've negotiated a good price." "You... what?" I couldn't find the words with indignation. Mr. Benson, a full man in an expensive suit, stepped up to meet me. "Mrs. Hemmings, your son mentioned that you're considering selling the house. I must say, it's an excellent investment, especially with the rising real estate prices in your area." "My son is wrong," I retorted. "I'm not selling my house, and I would ask that you leave my property immediately." The Coleman couple looked embarrassed. They rose quickly, mumbled an apology, and headed for the exit. Mr. Benson followed them, casting a perplexed glance at Oberon. When the door closed behind them, I turned to my son and daughter-in-law. "How could you?" I asked, barely containing my anger. "How could you invite a realtor and buyers into my house without my knowledge or consent?" Oberon looked annoyed but unrepentant. "Mother, be reasonable. This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone. And it's perfect for Trinity and me. We're willing to pay a good price, enough for you to live comfortably in a nursing home." "I'm not selling my house," I repeated firmly. "Not to you or anyone else. And I'm not going to a nursing home. This is my home, and I'm staying here." Trinity let out an exasperated sigh. "Agatha, you're being unreasonable. Think about the future, about your health, about your safety. There are too many stairs, too large an area to care for. And Oberon and I could create a real family nest here." "A family nest?" I couldn't hold back a bitter chuckle. "You don't want children. You said yourself that children are too much responsibility." "People change," Trinity shrugged. "Maybe we're ready for that responsibility now." I shook my head, not believing a word she said. "Regardless of your plans, my house is not for sale. Now, I'd like you to respect my rules and not invite outsiders in without my permission." I headed for the stairs, feeling the need for privacy in my room, but Oberon blocked my path. His face contorted with anger, the mask of politeness finally falling away. "Enough, Mother," he said quietly, but with such fury that I stepped back involuntarily. "Stop pretending you're still in control. This house is too good for you. You can't take care of it. You can't maintain it. This is a place for a young family, not a lonely old woman." I was shocked by his words, by his tone, by the contempt with which he looked at me. Was this really my son? The boy I had raised with such love and care? "Oberon, I'm asking you to step back and let me pass," I said, trying to speak calmly, though everything inside was trembling. "No, Mother," he didn't budge. "It's time you heard the truth. Trinity and I are staying here. This is our home now, and you'd better find somewhere else. Something smaller, simpler, something suitable for your age and status." "My status?" I couldn't believe my ears. "What status?" "The status of a lonely pensioner with no means of support," Trinity interjected. "Let's be honest, Agatha. You can't afford this house. Mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, utilities are all too burdensome on your modest budget." "I was doing just fine before you came along," I objected. "And I'll continue to manage when you're gone. Now I ask you to step back and let me pass." Oberon did not move. His eyes, so similar to his father's, looked at me with cold determination. "Mother, I am not joking. You'd better leave, pack your things, and look for another place to live. This is our home now. I couldn't believe this was really happening, that my own son was kicking me out of my home. The house I'd bought with my own money, the one I'd dreamed of all my life. Oberon, I said, feeling my voice shake. This house belongs to me. I bought it with my own money. I'm paying the mortgage on it, and I'm not going anywhere. Mom, leave now. His voice got even quieter, even more threatening. Trust me, it'll be better for everyone, especially for you. In his words, I heard not just a demand, but an implicit threat. What did he mean by that? What were they going to do if I refused to leave? I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where had that little boy I loved so much gone? That teenager I'd given everything I had to make him happy? That young man whose education I had paid for? Denying myself everything? There was a stranger standing in front of me, cold, calculating, ready to throw his own mother out on the street for material gain. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, listening to every sound in the house, afraid that Oberon and Trinity might do something while I slept. Their words, full of threats and disdain, wouldn't leave my mind. How could my own son do such a thing? How could he change so much from a sweet boy to a cold, calculating man ready to kick his own mother out of her home? By morning, I had made a decision. I had to leave temporarily. Not because I had given up or recognized their right to my home, but because I needed space to think, to gather my strength and plan my next steps. It wasn't safe to stay under the same roof with people who were openly threatening me. I waited until Oberon and Trinity left for another meeting and quickly packed a small bag with the most essential items. Then I called my longtime friend Eleanor Brooks, who I'd worked with at the daycare center together for years. Ellie, I need your help, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Can I stay with you for a few days? Agatha? What's wrong? Eleanor immediately sensed something was wrong. I briefly explained the situation without going into details. I was ashamed to admit that my own son was trying to take my house away from me. Come at once, Eleanor said without hesitation. My door is always open to you. I left a short note on the kitchen table. Gone away for a few days. Please do not touch my things or invite strangers into my home. Then she locked her bedroom door, grabbed her bag, and left the house without looking back. Eleanor lived in a small apartment on the other side of Miles City. It was a modest but cozy dwelling, filled with books, plants, and souvenirs from her travels. She welcomed me with open arms and a cup of hot tea. Tell me about it, she said as we settled into her small living room. What's really going on? And I told her everything, how Oberon and Trinity had come asking for temporary shelter, how they had gradually begun to make their own rules in my house, how they had openly declared that the house was theirs now and I had to leave. With each word I felt lighter, as if the weight that had been pressing down on me all these weeks was slowly falling away. I always knew Oberon was selfish, Eleanor shook her head when I finished. But to go to this extent, that's crossing all boundaries. I don't understand what happened to him, I sighed. I always tried to give him the best of everything, even if it meant giving up my own wants and needs. And this is how he repaid me. It's not about what you did or didn't do, Agatha. Eleanor took my hand. Some people are just like that. They take and take and take, never thinking about giving something back in return. We talked until late into the night. Eleanor was not only a good listener, but a wise counselor. She didn't rush to conclusions, didn't offer easy solutions, but asked questions that made me think and analyze the situation from different angles. What are you going to do next? She asked when we finally decided to go to bed. I don't know, I answered honestly. I don't want to lose my house, but I also have no idea how to fight with my own son. Get some sleep, Eleanor said. The morning is wiser in the evening. Tomorrow we'll come up with a plan of action. I lay down on the fold-out couch in the living room, but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts swirled in my head, returning to the same question. How did it all come to this? Where had I gone wrong in raising Oberon? Could this have been prevented if I had done things differently? In the morning after breakfast, Eleanor suggested a walk around the city. You need to clear your head, she said, and I want to show you something. We left the house and walked leisurely through the familiar streets of Miles City. The day was clear and warm. People were hurrying about their business. Children were playing in the park. An ordinary, peaceful picture so far removed from the storm that was raging in my life. Eleanor led me to a small building on the outskirts of town. The sign above the entrance read, Gamblers Anonymous Group. Meetings every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Why are we here? I asked, not understanding. I didn't want to tell you yesterday so as not to add cause for concern, Eleanor replied. But I've seen Oberon here a few times. He came to meetings, but he never went inside. Just stood at the entrance, smoked, and then left. I was shocked. Do you think he has a gambling problem? I don't know for sure, Eleanor said cautiously. But there are other signs. Remember you said they attributed their financial problems to bad investments and job loss? Those are typical excuses of the players. They rarely admit the real reason for their debts. We went on, and Eleanor continued. Besides, there aren't many places to gamble in our town, but there is an underground casino in an old warehouse on Riverside Street. I've seen Oberon's car parked there a few times, including after they moved in with you. I felt the ground go from under my feet. Gambling? An underground casino? It sounded like the plot of a crime movie, not my son's life. But a lot of things were starting to make sense. Their sudden financial problems, their rent debt, their desperate attempts to get my house. Do you think they want to sell my house to pay off the debt? I asked, already knowing the answer. Eleanor nodded. That's the most likely explanation. Gambling debts are no joke, especially when it comes to an underground casino. They have their own methods of collection there, and they're not always legal. We stopped at a small cafe and ordered coffee. I needed time to digest all this information. My son is a gambler mired in debt. My daughter-in-law is his accomplice, willing to do anything to get them out of a financial hole, even if it means losing my home. What should I do, Ellie? I asked, feeling completely lost. First of all, you need to protect yourself and your property, Eleanor said firmly. This is your home, and no one has the right to kick you out of it, not even your own son. But how? I shook my head. I can't call the police on my own son. Why not? Eleanor objected. If he threatens you, if he tries to take your property, that's a crime. Kinship doesn't give him the right to break the law. I thought for a moment. Eleanor was right, but the thought of calling the police on Oberon was too painful. Despite everything he'd done, he was still my son, my child. There are other ways, Eleanor continued, seeing my hesitation. You could get a lawyer, draw up a formal eviction notice. You could change the locks when they're not home. You can go to the bank and make sure no one but you can dispose of your property. Slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't let Oberon and Trinity take away the house I had paid for with years of labor and hardship. I couldn't let them destroy my dreams for the sake of paying off gambling debts. I had to fight, even if it meant confronting my own son. You're right, Ellie, I said firmly. I have to protect myself and my home, and I know where to start. We went back to Eleanor's house, and I made some important calls. First, I called the bank where I had taken out the mortgage and made sure that no changes to the contract could be made without my personal presence and signature. Then I contacted the legal aid office and made an appointment with a lawyer specializing in property disputes. Finally, I called my neighbor, Mr. Pruitt, and asked him to keep an eye on my house and let me know if he noticed anything suspicious. He agreed without hesitation and even offered his help if needed. In the evening, Eleanor and I discussed the situation again, but now I felt more confident. I had a plan, I had allies, I had the understanding that I had every right to defend my property. You know, Eleanor said as she poured the tea, I've always admired your fortitude. You raised your son single-handedly, worked several jobs, never complained about fate. Now you're facing another challenge, but I'm sure you'll get through it. Thank you, Ellie, I smiled. Your support means a lot to me. The next day I met with the lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, a short man with attentive eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He listened to my story, asked a few clarifying questions, and nodded. Your case is clear enough, Mrs. Hemmings, he said. Your son and his wife have no rights to your house. They are guests to whom you have temporarily provided lodging. If they refuse to move out at your request, it may be considered trespass and stay. What do you advise me to do? I asked. First, draft a formal eviction notice with a specific date by which they must vacate the premises. replied Mr. Jenkins. Second, if they ignore that notice, you have every right to go to the police to have them forcibly evicted. He helped me draft the notice, explained all the legalities, and advised me to serve the document in the presence of a witness. Also, he added, I would recommend that you don't stay alone with them. If they've already moved to threats, there's no guarantee they won't move to action. I nodded, completely agreeing with his advice. The thought of having to fear my own son was agonizing, but I couldn't ignore reality. Back at Eleanor's house, I showed her the eviction notice and told her about the lawyer's advice. She nodded approvingly. You're doing the right thing, Agatha. Now you need to hand them this document and let them know you're serious. I'll go home tomorrow, I decided. The longer I put it off, the harder it will be. In the evening, Mr. Pruitt called with alarming news. Mrs. Hemmings, there are some strangers at your house. I saw your son let 3 men in and they looked, shall we say, not very friendly. Her heart clenched with alarm. Who were these men? Oberon's friends, or creditors from an underground casino, coming to collect a debt? I thanked Mr. Pruitt for the information and asked him to let me know if anything else caught his attention. The night passed restlessly. I tossed and turned on Eleanor's couch, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if Oberon decided to sell the house without my consent? What if he forged my signature on the deeds? What if these strangers caused damage to my house? In the morning, I resolutely packed my things. Are you sure you want to come back today? Eleanor asked, seeing my tension. Yes, I answered firmly. This is my home and I won't let anyone take it away from me. Not even Oberon. Eleanor insisted on coming with me. I'll be your witness in serving the notice, she said. And just for moral support. We hailed a cab and 20 minutes later we were already standing in front of my house. It looked the same as always. A neat one-story house with a white picket fence and a flowering garden. But I knew it was different inside. I took a deep breath, clutched my keys in my hand, and strode determinedly toward the front door. Eleanor followed me, ready to support me at any moment. The door opened before I could put the key in the lock. Oberon stood on the threshold looking at me in surprise. Mom, you're back? Yes, Oberon, I said calmly. This is my home. And I'm back. He stepped back, letting us inside. I noticed the changes immediately. My paintings had been taken off the walls, the furniture had been rearranged, and boxes of my belongings stood in the corner of the living room. What's going on? I asked, pointing at the boxes. We decided to update the interior a bit, Oberon replied, clearly not expecting my return. Trinity thinks the house needs a more modern style. I didn't give permission to change the interior of my house, I said firmly, and I want all my belongings returned to their proper places. At that moment, Trinity came out of the kitchen. She froze when she saw me, then pulled a fake smile onto her face. Agatha, you're back. We weren't expecting you back so soon. Obviously, I nodded at the boxes of my things. Well, I have news for you both. Here, I held out an eviction notice to Oberon. It's an official demand to vacate my house within 3 days. Oberon took the document bewildered, ran his eyes over the text, then his face contorted with anger. What the hell is this? You're evicting us? Yes, I replied calmly. You've abused my hospitality, violated my rules, threatened me, and tried to take my property. I don't want you in my home anymore. You can't do that, Oberon exclaimed, tossing the document to the floor. We are your family. We have no other place to go. You might want to think about that before you try to force me out of my own home, I replied, keeping my composure. Before you bring in a realtor and potential buyers without my knowledge, before you threaten me. Trinity walked over to Oberon and put a hand on his shoulder as if holding him back. Agatha, let's talk calmly. I'm sure we can find a compromise. No, Trinity, I shook my head. There will be no compromise. This is my house. I paid for it. I'm maintaining it. And I want you both out of it within 3 days. Oberon took a step forward, his face contorted with rage. You don't realize what you're getting into, Mother. I'm in serious trouble. The people I owe don't mess around. They might come here and then... I know about your gambling problem, Oberon, I interrupted him. And I'm sorry you're in that situation. But that doesn't give you the right to take away my house. If you need help, there are special rehabilitation programs. There are support groups for players. He looked shocked. Where did you? That's not important. I didn't want to give Eleanor away. What matters is that I know the truth, and I won't let you use my house to solve your problems. Trinity's face suddenly changed, dropping her mask of politeness. You don't realize who you're dealing with, Agatha. These people will stop at nothing. They can harm not only us, but you as well. Are you threatening me, Trinity? I asked, feeling the anger building up inside. No, she backed away. I'm just giving you a warning, for your own good. My good is my home and my independence, I replied firmly. And I will defend them with every means at my disposal. If you don't vacate the house within 3 days, I will call the police. You wouldn't dare, Oberon hissed. I am your son. Yes, you are my son, I agreed, and that makes your betrayal all the more painful. But I won't let you manipulate me with that fact. You're a grown man, Oberon, and you must be responsible for your actions. Eleanor, who had been silently watching our conversation, walked over to me and took me under her arm. Agatha has said all she wants to say. The notice has been served. The terms are clear. 3 days, no more. We headed for the stairs leading to the second floor where my bedroom was. But Oberon blocked our way. Where are you going? To my bedroom, I replied. I want to make sure all my things are in place. No. He didn't move from his spot. You're not going in there. I felt my anxiety rising. What is he hiding? What is there in my bedroom that I shouldn't see? Oberon, it's my house and my bedroom, I said, trying to speak calmly. I'm going in there whether you want me to or not. No, he repeated, his voice shaking with tension. You don't understand. There are people there. People? In my bedroom? I was shocked. Trinity walked over to him and whispered something in his ear. Oberon shook his head, keeping his eyes on me. No, she has to know, Mom. He took a deep breath. We're in trouble. Serious problems. The people I owe came this morning. They took some of your things as collateral. I felt the ground go from under my feet. My stuff, taken as collateral? What exactly did they take? I asked, already dreading to hear the answer. Your jewelry, Oberon replied, averting his eyes. The ones that were in the jewelry box on my dressing table. And the deeds to the house. This was too much. My jewelry, among which were family heirlooms passed down to me by my mother. The deeds to the house, without which I couldn't prove my ownership. This was no longer just a breach of trust, it was a real crime. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Immediately. No! Oberon tried to snatch the phone from me. You don't understand! These people are dangerous! If you call the police, they'll... Get away from me, I backed away, clutching the phone tightly. I'm not going to let you or anyone else intimidate me in my own home. Eleanor stepped between us, protecting me. Oberon, stop. You're only making things worse. If you really care about your mother, help her get her things and papers back. Oberon looked lost, torn between fear of the creditors and the realization that he had gone too far. I can't. They won't give the stuff back until I pay back what I owe them. How much do you owe them? I asked. A lot, he answered quietly. More than I can pay back. And you thought to solve that problem by selling my house? I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. He nodded without looking me in the eye. I didn't see any other way out. There's always another way out, Oberon, I said. You could have sought professional help. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have been honest with me about your problems instead of trying to trick me into taking my house. I dialed the police despite Oberon's protests. I reported the theft of personal belongings and documents, the threats, the attempted real estate fraud. The dispatcher assured me that a patrol car would be on the scene in 10 minutes. While waiting for the police, we were all silent. Oberon sat on the couch with his head down on his hands. Trinity paced nervously around the room, casting angry glances at me. I stood at the window, looking out at my garden, at my roses, which were still blooming despite the barbaric pruning. I felt a strange calmness. Yes, I had lost my son. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The man sitting on my couch was not the boy I had raised with so much love. He had made his choice and now had to face the consequences. But I hadn't lost myself. I didn't lose my strength, my determination, my ability to fight for what was rightfully mine. I returned to my home not as a frightened old woman ready to give in to the pressure of the young, but as a hostess ready to defend my territory. 10 minutes later, just as the dispatcher had promised, a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. Two policemen, a tall man with a tired look and a young woman with a determined expression, entered the porch and rang the doorbell. I opened it, feeling strangely relieved by their presence. "Mrs. Hemmings?" the older policeman asked, checking his notebook. "Yes, that's me," I replied. "Thank you for coming so quickly." He nodded. "We got your report of the theft and threats. Can you tell us what happened?" I invited them into the house where Oberon was still sitting on the couch, now with a look of panic on his face. Trinity was frozen against the wall, arms crossed over her chest, with a defiant look. "This is my son, Oberon, and his wife, Trinity." I introduced them to the police officers. "They've been staying with me for a month now, after they were evicted from their apartment for non-payment. Today I discovered that my personal belongings and the deeds to my house were missing. Oberon confessed that he gave them to his creditors because of gambling debts." The policemen looked at each other. Then the senior officer turned to Oberon. "Is this true, sir?" Oberon looked cornered. He cast a pleading look at me, but I remained adamant. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, it is true. But I didn't want to. I was going to give everything back." "Who exactly did you give Mrs. Hemmings' things to?" the policewoman asked, pulling out a notebook. "I can't say." Oberon shook his head. They're dangerous people." "Are we talking about the underground casino on Riverside Street?" the senior officer clarified. And by the way Oberon flinched, it was clear that it was a hit. "We know about this place," the policeman continued, "and about the people who hold it. They've been on our list for some time now. If you help us with information, it could play in your favor." Trinity walked over to Oberon and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't say anything. You have no idea what they are capable of." "And you have no idea what the justice system is capable of, ma'am," the policewoman replied calmly. "Harboring a crime, accessory to theft are serious charges." I watched this scene with a sense of unreality. My son, my Oberon, was involved not just in gambling, but in connections with the underworld. How could this have happened? Where did I go wrong in his upbringing? The senior officer turned to me. "Mrs. Hemmings, do you wish to press formal charges against your son and his wife?" It was a difficult question. Part of me wanted to punish them for everything they'd done, for deceiving me, for manipulating me, for trying to take my home away. But the other part, the motherly part, still loved Oberon no matter what. "I want my things and papers back," I said after a pause. "And I want them out of my house, today. As for the charges, I'll think about it." The police officers nodded. "We can help with the eviction," the senior officer said. "As for your belongings, we'll investigate. There's a good chance they're still in the possession of the people your son owes money to." Oberon jumped up from the couch. "No, you don't understand. If the police start investigating, they'll think I ratted them out. They will come after me." "You should have thought of that before you got involved with people like that," the policewoman remarked. "And certainly before giving them other people's things." Trinity suddenly changed tactics. She approached me with a pleading look on her face. "Agatha, please think of your son. He's in danger. These people are not joking. They could hurt him." "What was he thinking when he tried to force me out of my house?" I asked, not giving in to her manipulation. "When he threatened me? When he gave my belongings, my family heirlooms, to some thugs?" "He was desperate," Trinity continued. "We both were. Debts were mounting. We were being threatened. We saw no other way out." "There's always another way out," I replied firmly. "You could have sought professional help. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have honestly told me about the problems. Instead, you chose deceit and betrayal." Oberon walked over to me, tears in his eyes. "Mother, I'm sorry. I know what I did was horrible, but I am your son, your blood. Are you really going to let me end up on the streets? Or worse, in jail?" I looked at him and saw not a grown man, but a little boy who had broken a vase and now feared punishment. All my life I had forgiven him for his misdeeds, excused his behavior, protected him from the consequences. Maybe that was exactly my mistake. Oberon, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. I have always loved you, and I always will. But love doesn't mean letting you ruin my life or your own. You're a grown man and you have to be responsible for your actions. But Mom, he started, but I held up my hand, stopping him. I won't press charges if you help the police get my things and papers back, but I want you and Trinity out of my house tonight, and I don't want to see you until you admit your mistakes and change your behavior. His face contorted with anger and despair. You're throwing us out on the street? Your own son? Where are we going to go? You're adults, I replied calmly. You'll find somewhere to go. Maybe this will be the first step to taking responsibility for your own lives. Trinity began packing, slamming closet doors and drawers loudly. Oberon stood there without moving, as if he couldn't believe this was actually happening. The police officers watched the scene with professional calm. A female officer approached me. Mrs. Hemmings, are you sure you want them to leave today? By law, you have to give them 3 days' notice. I already gave them notice, I replied. But after what happened, I don't feel safe with them under the same roof. She nodded. In that case, we can classify this as an emergency eviction due to a threat to the landlord's safety. We'll stay here until they pack up their belongings and leave. The next 2 hours passed in tense silence. Oberon and Trinity gathered their belongings under the supervision of the police officers. I sat in the kitchen with Eleanor, who stayed by my side the whole time, supporting me with her presence. You're doing the right thing, Agatha, she said, squeezing my hand. It's hard, but necessary. I nodded, not trusting my voice. A storm of emotions raged inside me: anger, resentment, frustration, but also deep sadness. I was losing my son, not physically, but emotionally. The rift that had occurred between us could prove insurmountable. Finally, Oberon and Trinity finished packing. Their belongings were packed into suitcases and boxes, which they began carrying out to their car. I walked out to see them off, feeling the need to end this chapter of our lives face to face. Trinity walked past me without saying a word, with an expression of cold fury on her face. Oberon stopped on the porch, looking at me with a mixture of resentment, anger, and, I wanted to believe, remorse. I didn't think you were capable of such a thing, he said quietly. Kicking your own son out on the street. And I didn't think you were capable of trying to take the house away from your own mother, I replied. Apparently, we were both wrong about each other. So what now? He asked. We'll never see each other again? I sighed. That's up to you, Oberon. When you're ready to admit your mistakes, take responsibility for your actions, and truly change, my door will be open, but not before. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to find a loophole in my words, an opportunity for manipulation. But when he couldn't find it, he just nodded and walked to the car, where Trinity was waiting for him. I stood on the porch watching them drive away. Part of me wanted to run after them, to stop them, to tell them I forgave everything, that they could stay. But I knew that would be wrong, for them and for me. Sometimes love means setting boundaries, even if it hurts. The police officers approached me as Oberon's car disappeared around the corner. We'll contact you as soon as we have news of your belongings, the senior officer said. In the meantime, I recommend changing the locks and installing a security system. I thanked them for their help and they left, leaving me alone with Eleanor in my now quiet and empty house. How do you feel? Eleanor asked when we returned to the living room. Emptiness, I answered honestly. Like a part of me was gone with them. But also, relief, like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. She nodded understandingly. That's normal. You just went through a very difficult ordeal. Give yourself time to heal. That evening, Eleanor stayed with me. We cooked dinner, cleaned up the house after Oberon and Trinity's hasty departure, talked about everything and nothing. Her presence was the anchor that kept me grounded in reality, kept me from sinking into regret and self-recrimination. Before I went to bed, I went out into the garden to get some fresh air and collect my thoughts. My roses, despite the barbaric pruning, were still blooming, showing remarkable resilience. I thought I could follow their example of recovering from what seemed like irreparable damage. The next few days were filled with practical concerns. I changed the locks, installed the security system, returned my belongings to their places from the boxes Oberon and Trinity had put them in. Slowly, the house became mine again. Cozy, peaceful, filled with warmth and light. A week later, a police officer called with good news. They had raided the underground casino and found my belongings and documents. Oberon, it turned out, had cooperated with the police by providing information about the establishment's activities and its owners. Perhaps this was the first step to fixing him. I got my jewelry and house papers back. Some things were missing. They had probably already been sold or given to someone else. But the most important things were back, and that was the main thing. Life was slowly falling into a new direction. I resumed my gardening, started going to the library again, and socialized with my neighbors. Mrs. Pruitt often came over for a cup of tea, sometimes bringing her grandchildren who enjoyed playing in my garden. Mr. Perkins at the library invited me to a literary evening where I met several interesting people my age. Eleanor was my constant companion during this period. We went shopping together, attended local events, and sometimes just sat on my veranda watching the sunset and talking about life. Her support was invaluable, and I have often thought that true family is not necessarily those who are related to you by blood, but those who stick around in times of need. There was no news from Oberon. Sometimes I wondered where he was now, how he was coping with his problems, if he was thinking of me. But I didn't try to contact him. He had to make that move himself when he was ready. A month after they left, I received a letter from Oberon. Not an electronic one, but a real paper one, written in his distinctive handwriting. I held the envelope in my hands for a long time, hesitant to open it, afraid of what I might find. New accusations, new manipulations, new attempts at guilt. Finally, I gathered my courage and opened the letter. Inside was a piece of paper, scribbled in small handwriting, and a small photograph of Oberon as a child, sitting on my lap, both of us smiling at the camera. I remembered that day. His 6th birthday, we were at the park eating ice cream and laughing about something forgotten. I began to read, "Dear Mom, I thought for a long time before writing this letter. I didn't know what to say, how to explain my behavior for which there is no excuse. But I must try. First of all, I want to say that I'm sorry. Sorry for everything I've done and said, for the pain I've caused you, for betraying your trust. You gave me everything, love, care, education, support, and I repaid you with ingratitude and selfishness. I'm not looking for excuses for my actions, but I want you to know that I was really desperate. Gaming addiction is a disease that warped my thinking, made me see only short-term solutions without thinking about the consequences or who I was hurting. After Trinity and I left your house, our relationship fell apart. She couldn't forgive me for my mistakes and left. I was left alone, with no money, no home, no job. It was the darkest period of my life. But strangely enough, it was this falling to the bottom that made me finally realize where I was going and what I was doing with my life. I sought help, started attending a Gamblers Anonymous group, and found a therapist who specializes in addictions. Now I'm working on myself every day. It's a hard road with downs and ups, but I'm determined to change, to become a better person, for myself and for those I love. I'm not asking you to immediately forgive me or let me back into your life. I realize that the trust I've broken can't be rebuilt overnight. But I hope that over time, step by step, I can prove to you that your son, the boy you loved, is still here, underneath the layers of mistakes and bad decisions. With love and remorse, Oberon. I reread the letter several times, unable to define my feelings. Joy that he was alive and seemed to be on the path of correction. Sadness at what he was going through. A cautious hope that perhaps not all was lost. But I wasn't in a hurry to answer. Words are only the beginning. Real remorse is proven by deeds, by changes in behavior, by consistent steps to right the wrongs done. I decided to give Oberon time to prove his intentions, and myself time to heal. 2 more months passed. Summer had turned to autumn. My roses had bloomed, but the garden was still vibrant with the colors of autumn flowers and leaves. I was busy preparing for winter, cutting back plants, covering the most delicate specimens, preparing the house for the cold. My life took on a new rhythm, a new direction. I started volunteering at the local library, holding a reading hour for children every Saturday. I signed up for an art course, which I had dreamed of for many years, but never found the time. I made new acquaintances that gradually grew into friendships. Sometimes I thought about Oberon, about how his life was going. He didn't write or call anymore, respecting my desire for distance. But through mutual acquaintances, I learned that he had found a job, rented a modest apartment, and regularly attended a support group. It was good news, and I was happy for him, although I kept my emotions under control. One warm fall day, while I was working in the garden, Mrs. Pruitt approached me. "You have a visitor, Agatha," she said with a slight smile. "A young man who looks very much like you." I straightened, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "Oberon?" She nodded. "He's waiting at the gate. Asked if he could talk to you. I said I'd find out." I took off my gardening gloves, shook the soil off my knees, took a deep breath. "Thank you, Martha. I'll talk to him." Oberon stood at the gate, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. He looked different, thinner, with a more serious expression, wearing simple, modest clothes instead of the usual designer clothes. When he saw me, his face lit up with an uncertain smile. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I stared at him, trying to find in his eyes, in his posture, in his voice, signs of the old Oberon, manipulative, selfish, willing to do anything for his own gain. But I saw only weariness, remorse, and hope. "Come in," I said, opening the wicket. "We can talk on the veranda." We sat in wicker chairs, a table with a vase of fall flowers between us. Oberon wrung his hands nervously, hesitant to start a conversation. "How are you?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Better," he replied. "Much better than I was, yeah. I'm working on myself. Every single day. It's not easy, but I'm trying." I nodded. "I heard you found a job." "Yeah," he smiled slightly. "It's nothing special. I work at a bookstore. The pay is small, but I like it. The people, the books, the quiet atmosphere. That's what I need right now." We talked some more about his life, about mine, about little things and important things. I didn't ask about Trinity, and he didn't mention her. The conversation was casual, but beneath the surface I could feel the tension of unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Finally, Oberon pulled himself together. "Mother, I've come to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry. What I have done is unforgivable. I betrayed your trust, tried to take away what you hold dear, hurt the man who has always loved me unconditionally. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or ever. But I want you to know that I realize my mistakes and I'm working on never repeating them." I stared at him, feeling different emotions struggling in my soul. Motherly love, wanting to forgive all at once, caution, reminding me of past disappointments, hope that people really can change. "I appreciate your words, Oberon," I said finally. "And I trust that you are sincere right now. But trust is a fragile thing. It's easy to break and very hard to rebuild. It will take time, a lot of time, for us to build a new relationship." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I understand. And I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. To take small steps, to prove my sincerity day by day." We talked for another hour before he left, promising to call next week. I didn't know how that conversation would turn out, whether it would be the beginning of a new phase of our relationship or a one-time episode. But for the first time in a long time, I felt not bitterness and disappointment at the thought of a son, but cautious hope. That evening, I sat on the veranda watching the sunset and reflecting on the vicissitudes of life. 3 months ago, I thought I had lost my son forever, that our relationship was irretrievably ruined. Today, there is a faint ray of hope that perhaps all is not lost. But even if our relationship with Oberon was never fully restored, I knew I could handle it. The past few months have taught me a lot. The strength that is within me, the value of true friendship, and the importance of setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. I've learned to live for myself without feeling guilty or selfish, to take care of my needs, to follow my desires, to enjoy life to the fullest. My home became a true sanctuary, a place where I felt safe, a place that reflected my personality